From the very moment I bought my lake cabin, I knew it was only a matter of time before the HOA tried to sink their claws into me. But what I didn't expect was that they'd actually try to cut me off from my own water supply. The problem for them, they didn't know the entire subdivision, every house, every yard, every fancy community fountain ran through the very plumbing system I designed, owned and controlled. It all started one hot summer afternoon when I heard the rattle of a pickup outside my cabin, stepped out onto the porch and saw two men in neon vests unloading tools from the back of their truck. My cabin sits at the edge of a private lake, surrounded by pine trees, with the HOA community about a mile uphill. That community wasn't even there when I built my cabin 20 years ago. They came later, buying cheap parcels and then forming a board to police everyone's business. One of the men walked up to me, clipboard in hand. "Sir," he said, adjusting his sunglasses, "we've been sent by the Lakeshore Estates HOA. They've decided your cabin is not in compliance, and we've been instructed to shut off your water line." I blinked. "Excuse me. This is my land, my cabin, my water system." He gave me a practiced smile. The HOA board voted. "You've refused to pay dues, refused to sign membership, and you've built structures that don't meet aesthetic guidelines. So the water's being shut off today." I laughed so hard the man frowned. "Buddy, if you even touch that line, you'll be cutting off water for 200 houses, including the HOA president's house." He squinted, confused. "What do you mean?" So I explained slowly, deliberately, that when the lake subdivision was built, the developers struck a deal with me. They had no natural water supply, no wells deep enough to sustain them, so they leased rights for me to pump from the very lake that my cabin sat beside. The entire plumbing infrastructure that ran uphill to the subdivision was installed on. My easement, my blueprints, my terms. Without me, they'd have nothing but dry taps. But apparently, the new HOA president, Patricia Harrington, either didn't read the agreement or thought she could bully me into submission. I told the workers, "Go ahead. Try it. You'll see how many angry homeowners you'll have at your door within 20 minutes. They left, mumbling, clearly unnerved. The next morning, Patricia herself showed up. She pulled into my gravel driveway in her shiny black Lexus SUV, stepping out in high heels like she was walking into a boardroom instead of a pine forest. She strutted up, waving a thick folder of papers. "Mr. Lawson," she began in that clipped voice of hers, "you've been warned several times. This is your last chance to comply with Lakeshore Estates HOA regulations. Pay your dues, repaint your cabin to match the neighborhood color scheme, and remove your dock from the lake. Otherwise, we'll proceed with water disconnection." I crossed my arms. "Patricia, let me spell this out for you, that dock. Lake. That cabin. My property. And that water you're threatening to cut off? It belongs to me. You're all living on borrowed water lines." She smirked, flipping through her papers. "We'll see what the county says," I chuckled. "I think the county will be very interested to hear how an HOA is threatening to tamper with a licensed utility line they don't even own." Smile faltered for just a second before she snapped her folder shut. "You'll regret this." And so began the war. Within a week, I got letters in the mail, fines for unapproved exterior structures, unauthorized dock extension, failure to comply with landscaping standards. Each letter demanded thousands of dollars. I ignored them. Then came the threats of legal action, the calls at all hours, even a couple of strangers snooping around my property line, snapping photos. Finally, one Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of machinery. I rushed outside and saw the HOA had actually hired contractors to dig near the main line that fed uphill. They had a backhoe tearing into the dirt. Trying to expose the pipes, I grabbed my phone, dialed the sheriff, and walked straight up to Patricia, who was supervising with her arms folded like she owned the world. "You're trespassing," I said, "and you're tampering with utility infrastructure under a legal lease agreement. That's a felony," she sneered. "You think the sheriff cares about one stubborn old man in a shack? The law is on our side." But when the deputies arrived, things didn't go the way she expected. I showed them my deeds, easements, and contracts, neatly filed, signed by county officials and notarized. The HOA had nothing but their own bylaws. The deputies shut the operation down immediately, telling Patricia she could be charged with criminal mischief and unlawful tampering if she didn't leave. She turned red, sputtering about connections and authority. But in the end, she had no choice but to pack up and leave. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But Patricia wasn't the type to take a loss quietly. A month later, I noticed something strange. Water pressure in my cabin was unusually low. I checked my lines and realized the HOA had installed a restriction valve on the main pipe, hoping to choke my supply. What they didn't realize was that the valve they tampered with also throttled their own flow uphill. Within days, homeowners started calling plumbers, complaining that their showers barely trickled and their sprinklers sputtered dry by the end of the week. Patricia had an emergency meeting with furious residents demanding answers. I know this because several of them came straight to me afterward, asking why they couldn't water their lawns or fill their pools. That's when I showed them exactly where their plumbing came from, the intake pump at my lake. "You've been lied to," I told them. "Patricia thinks she can bully me by tampering with my line, but every time she does, she's cutting off your water too." They were livid. Word spread fast. Within days, I had a line of angry neighbors pounding on Patricia's door, demanding her resignation, but Patricia still wasn't finished. No, she decided to double down. Late one night, I caught two men in hoodies trying to sneak onto my property with tools. They were aiming for the pump station by the lake. Luckily, I'd installed motion sensors and cameras years ago. I stepped out onto the porch with my spotlight and my old hunting rifle slung across my shoulder. "Evening, gentlemen," I called. "Care to explain why you're trespassing?" They bolted. The sheriff picked them up on the road 15 minutes later. Both admitted they'd been hired by Patricia to disable my pump. That was the last straw. The following morning, I shut off the entire line leading to the subdivision. Completely. No water for anyone. Then I posted a notice on the HOA's community bulletin board. "Water service has been terminated due to repeated unlawful tampering, trespassing, and harassment by the Lakeshore Estates HOA. To reinstate service, the HOA must sign a new agreement, acknowledging my ownership, pay damages for tampering, and issue a public apology." The neighborhood went into chaos. Lawns went brown. Toilets wouldn't flush. Kids cried because the community pool was bone dry. Within 24 hours, Patricia was bombarded with hundreds of angry calls. By day 3, she was cornered at a board, meeting with residents screaming at her. Finally, the board voted her out. She was forced to resign in disgrace. The new president, a far more reasonable man named Tom, came to me with an olive branch. "Mr. Lawson," he said, hat in hand, "we just want water back. We're prepared to sign whatever agreement you think is fair." I handed him a new contract, one that tripled the HOA's lease payments, required them to cover my legal costs, and explicitly forbade them from ever interfering with my cabin or my property again. They signed without hesitation. Now, my cabin is more peaceful than ever. The HOA stays far away from me. Their residents are grateful their taps still run, and Patricia, she sold her mansion at a loss and moved out of state, humiliated. Sometimes I sit on my dock at sunset, listening to the lap of water against the shore, and I can't help but smile. They tried to cut me off, but in the end I controlled every drop they depended on, and they'll never forget it. Asterisk, this story is just the beginning. There is so much more ahead. Subscribe to the channel to join me on this journey.